Those are the cantors from our movie, When Do We Eat? Singing Nigun style, Eliyahu Hanavi, the melody we sing on Saturday nights when we wish each other a Shavua Tov, a good Vach, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. Great to be starting the week by learning some beautiful, beautiful Torah together. Let's light up the darkness. This is a really interesting page of Talmud we're going to be learning tonight about some stuff we've covered before, but in much richer detail this time. What happened to the Ark of the Covenant? Where did it end up? What is the reasons for the sages' disagreement on where it ended up? What reasons did they bring for where they think the Ark of the Covenant ended up? Where it lay in the Holy of Holies. There's a lot of beautiful spiritual and historical teaching in tonight's page. Who is with us as we get it going on a Saturday night? Paula in Chicago, Nancy in North Carolina, Tanner in North Carolina, Belle up all night in Shelbyville, Illinois. Christo, a good week to all, was finally able to attend my synagogue this morning. After 15 long months, was great to be back again. Mazel tov, mazel tov. And you can wish me a mazel tov. Yesterday we had a beautiful, beautiful experience out in Malibu where they held the graduation of my daughter's high school. You know, it's a great school. It's called Shalhevet High School here in LA. It's an Orthodox Jewish school for boys and girls. And they emphasize as much as, great academics, a real development of menschlichkeit, right? So a mensch is somebody who has good values, right? And they just stress how important it is to develop good values in the kids. And because that's what they go for, they get it. I mean, these kids, they're just really wonderful kids who are going to go out there and make a difference. We're so proud of our daughter Molly and all of the Shalhevet class of 21. Bill says, Shalom from Berkeley. I've had a bit of a scare. The apartment I was going to be moving into turned out to be a rental scam to take my money. Fortunately, thanks to God, my credit union was super on the ball and they got me the money back. Well, may you put this experience in the past and end up in the place where you were supposed to be, Bill. Gwen wishing us a good night from Michigan. Michael is just thinking about an Ark question and looking forward to this. Nicholas with us from Portland. Carolyn wishing a Shavua Tov. Paul in the Great Northwest. Leah in LA. Edie in El Paso. Carolyn from Bremerton, Miriam in Craig, Colorado. Christo says Mazel Tov, and a few other people do as well. Welcome, everybody. Over there on the YouTube side, we have Seraphim saying Shalom, and Tetra wishing us a thumbs up. Welcome, everybody. All right, let's just get right to it. There's so much good material it's sort of hard to omit anything from what we're covering today's page. So I'm going to just try to keep it moving. This is really good stuff. So where are we? We're in Tractate Yoma. This is the sixth volume of the Talmud. We're on Daf Nun Daled, page 54, though we're actually starting toward the end of the B side of page 53. We've been generally working our way through the observance of Yom Kippur as it was done when the temple was standing, the tabernacle, and then the temple. And we haven't been able to observe Yom Kippur in this way since the second temple was destroyed. However, on Yom Kippur, we still recount the avodah, the service that the high priest carried out on behalf of the nation. We still learn it and recite it during Yom Kippur services. So let's get right into it. We're in the fourth Mishna of chapter 5. After the ark was taken into exile, there was a rock in the Holy of Holies from the days of the early prophets. David and Samuel, who laid the groundwork for the construction of the temple, and this stone was called the foundation rock. We have a note here from Rav Steinsaltz, whose notes are throughout the Koran Talmud, and it's his elucidation that we learn. And he says that various sources say, so there's this building now built by Muslims on top of the Temple Mount called the Dome of the Rock. I haven't been in there, but there's a photograph of the inside, and it shows this rock. It's called the Dome of the Rock. So that rock is understood to be, at least by many sources, certainly not by all, but by many, as this foundation rock, meaning that this is the rock that was inside the Holy of Holies. And when the Ark of the Covenant was in the Holy of Holies, so that was the first temple, it was not in the second temple, but in the first temple, the Ark of the Covenant sat on this rock. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go through the Gemara on this, why it was called the foundation rock. But now we continue. It was this rock, the foundation rock, it was 3 finger breadths higher than the ground. And the high priest would place the incense on it. After the high priest left the Holy of Holies, he took the blood of the bull sacrificed as a sin offering from the one who was stirring it. So remember that the high priest enters the Holy of Holies multiple times during Yom Kippur. The first time he comes in, he brings the coal pan and the incense, and he fills the room with a cloud of incense. He leaves. He does other duties outside. He returns with the blood of the bull, which is a sin offering, making an atonement for himself, his family, and the other priests. He sprinkles that, as we're going to be talking about tonight. Then he leaves. Then the goats are brought, right? One goat is sent out into the wilderness to Azazel, and the other goat is slaughtered within the temple, and he brings some blood of the goat, and he sprinkles that in the Holy of Holies. So these are 3 separate visits into the Holy of Holies. And we're learning about that. So after the high priest left the Holy of Holies, when he brought the incense, he took the blood of the bull, sacrificed as a sin offering from the one who had been stirring it so that it would not coagulate, and he returns into the place that he had previously entered, the Holy of Holies, and he stood at the place where he had previously stood to offer the incense between the staves, the long poles that were used to transport the Ark of the Covenant when the children of Israel were walking in the wilderness, in the desert, right, where we spent 40 years. Why were we in the desert for 40 years? We just covered that in this past week's Torah portion, the sin of the spies. But later, right, the tabernacle settled down, and it was, just in 1 or 2 places, maybe 3, during the 400 years that the tabernacle stood within the land of Israel. And then eventually David selected the site with Samuel, and then Solomon built the temple, which was the first temple. And then the Ark of the Covenant just sat inside that temple until shortly before its demise, when that ark was taken into hiding. We'll be reading about that in the Gemara on this Mishnah. But first, let's finish reading the Mishnah. So he entered into the place that he had previously entered the Holy of Holies, and he stood at the place where he previously stood to offer the incense between the staves of the Ark of the Covenant. And he sprinkled from the blood 1 time upward and 7 times downward. And he would neither intend to sprinkle the blood upward nor to sprinkle it downward, but rather like one who whips, with the blood sprinkled in a single column, 1 drop below the other. And this is how he would count as he sprinkled to avoid error. 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, 1 and 5, 1 and 6, 1 and 7, 1 and 8. 1 and 7 is the last one. And the high priest then emerged from there, and he placed the bowl with the remaining blood from the bowl on the golden pedestal that was in the sanctuary, right? So the Holy of Holies is beyond the sanctuary. He would return to the sanctuary, and he would put down that vessel that contained the bull's blood. They brought him the goat to be sacrificed as a sin offering to God, right? 1 goat was sent out to the wilderness. 1 is slaughtered as an offering on behalf of the nation, and he slaughtered it, and he received its blood in the bowl, and he again entered into the place he had previously entered, the Holy of Holies, and he stood at the place that he previously stood, and he sprinkled from the blood of the goat 1 time upward and 7 times downward, and this is how he would count, just as he counted when sprinkling the blood of the bull, 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 2, etc. And the high priest then emerged from the Holy of Holies, and he placed the bowl with the remaining blood on the 2nd golden pedestal in the sanctuary. Rabbi Yehuda says there was only 1 pedestal there, and he took the blood of the bull from the pedestal and placed the blood of the goat in its place. And he sprinkled from the blood of the bull on the curtain opposite the ark from outside the Holy of Holies, 1 time upward and 7 times downward. So he would do a sprinkling with the bull's blood and then again with the goat's blood. First he did them inside the Holy of Holies toward the Ark of the Covenant, and then he repeated the sprinkling outside the Holy of Holies, standing in the sanctuary. The sanctuary also concerned the menorah and the showbread table and the incense altar. But at the back of the sanctuary was the curtain, or the partition that separated between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies. And then he would sprinkle in the same manner of sprinkling, right? So 1 up and 7 down. And he did that with the bull's blood and with the goat's blood toward the partition or the curtain between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies. That's what we're reading about right now. And he sprinkled from the blood of the bull on the curtain opposite the ark from outside the Holy of Holies, 1 time upward and 7 times downward. And he would not intend to go up or down, but rather he would whip it. And this is how he would count, etc., the same way of counting that he did when he was inside the Holy of Holies. And when he concluded, he took the blood of the goat from the pedestal, and he placed the blood of the bull in its place on the pedestal, and he sprinkled from the goat's blood on the curtain opposite the ark from the outside, just as he did with the blood of the bull, 1 time upward and 7 times downward, etc. Afterward, he poured the blood of the bull into the blood of the goat, and he placed the blood of the full bowl into the empty bowl so that the blood would be mixed well. That is the Mishnah. That was Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 5. Now we get into the Gemara. And the Gemara comments with regard to the wording of the Mishnah. It does not teach after the ark was buried, but rather it says after it was taken. At the beginning of our Mishnah, it said after the ark was taken. Now Rav Steinsaltz elucidates after the ark was taken into exile, there was a rock from the days of the early prophets. But the way it actually reads is after the ark was taken, there was a rock from the days of the early prophets. So it says after the ark was taken, not after the ark was buried. So where was the ark taken to? We've already established that the Ark of the Covenant was not present in the Second Temple. We saw, even in the last few days, that King Yoshiahu put the Ark of the Covenant into hiding before the end of the First Temple period, because he could see that the people of Israel had sinned so much that we were going to lose the right to have the temple in our midst. And indeed, eventually King Nebuchadnezzar came from Babylonia and destroyed the first temple. But our understanding is he was just, the hammer that God used to destroy it, and it didn't end well for Nebuchadnezzar. When the Jews when we go astray and we end up incurring God's wrath, okay, so one of our enemies will have the power to punish us, but it never ends well for our enemies. God forbid you should be the instrument of punishment against the Jews. But at any rate, we also have the understanding that it was the angel Gabriel who was really sent by God to do that, and who sort of made it possible for our enemies, Nebuchadnezzar, to destroy the first temple, and the Roman general to destroy the second temple. At any rate, the Mishnah starts by saying, after the ark was taken. If so, we learned this Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of the one who said that the ark was exiled to Babylonia and was not buried in its place as it was taught in a Baraisa. Because previously we've had a teaching that perhaps the Ark of the Covenant was buried in the Temple Mount, right? That there's some secret tunnel or some secret chamber deep, deep, deep in the Temple Mount, and that is where the Ark of the Covenant was hidden. But the other point of view is that it was exiled somewhere else. It was taken out of the Holy Land and exiled to some other place. Some say Ethiopia, some say Babylonia. So here it seems this Mishnah, since it says after the ark was taken, perhaps it implies that the ark was not buried in the Temple Mount, but rather that it was taken elsewhere. And where? That it was exiled to Babylonia. As it was taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Eliezer says, the ark was exiled to Babylonia. And for those who don't know, the Ark of the Covenant means the ark that contained the tablets of the Ten Commandments, right? The second set of tablets that remain whole, and the first set of tablets which Moses smashed in the incident of the golden calf. And then also there's some other objects along with it, the jar of manna, the anointing oil, etc. And Aaron's staff with the almond blossoms, right? So Rabbi Eliezer says the ark was exiled to Babylonia. As it is stated, this is from Second Book of Chronicles 36:10, and at the turn of the year, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him to Babylonia, along with the precious vessels of the house of the Lord. And these precious vessels must include the ark. We already have a tradition that certainly precious vessels, when the temple was destroyed, they took all the golden vessels, like we're learning about, the golden vessels that were used to carry the bull's blood or the goat's blood into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. When the foreign kings destroyed the temple, Nebuchadnezzar, it was taken to Babylonia. Eventually, the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians. And so in the book of Esther, which opens with a big feast held by Ahasuerus to celebrate, that he'd been the king for a while, it said that they were drinking with these special vessels. And we have a midrash that says that those vessels were actually the vessels from the temple. And it was obviously a huge sacrilege that they were being used, for a party in Persia. But the vessels were certainly taken away. The question is, was the Ark of the Covenant hidden by King Josiah, Yoshiahu, before the raiders from Babylonia were able to take were taking vessels into Babylonia? So was the Ark of the Covenant hidden in the Temple Mount or somewhere else, or did the Babylonians get it and take it out there? Likewise, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, the ark was exiled to Babylonia. As it is stated, this is from Isaiah 39:6, behold, the days come that all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored in until this day shall be carried to Babylonia. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. In Isaiah 39:6. What does this mean? This means that these are the 10 commandments, right? Nothing shall be left. Davar shall be left, says the Lord. These are the 10 commandments, dibrot, that are inside it. The word has the same root. And they too shall not be left behind. Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish says the ark was buried in its place. So this is the other opinion, that it was not taken to Babylonia, that King Josiah prevented that from happening because he could see that it was going to happen, so he buried it and didn't let Nebuchadnezzar get it. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish says the ark was buried in its place, as it is stated, and the ends of the staves were seen from the sacred place before the partition, but they could not be seen without, and they are there to this day. That's first book of Kings 8:8. The expression "to this day" means forever, as the text might be read at any time. And this teaches that the ark is hidden in its place. It's still there in the Temple Mount. The Gemara comments, and this opinion, that the ark was exiled to Babylonia, disagrees with the opinion of Ula. As Ula said, Rabbi Mattia ben Harash asked Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai in Rome, and since Rabbi Eliezer taught us once and twice, i.e. from two separate verses, that the ark was exiled to Babylonia, and the Gemara interrupts its citation of Rabbi Mattia ben Harash's question to identify these two verses. The first verse is that which we said, and brought him to Babylonia, along with the precious vessels of the house of the Lord. So what is the second verse? And Rabbi Eliezer said, as it is written, and gone from the daughter of Zion is all her splendor. That's Lamentations 1:6. What is the meaning of all her splendor? Hadara, all her splendor, Hadara. It means her chamber, Hadra, i.e. something that was hidden within the innermost chambers, namely the ark. So, this conversation that was had in Rome between Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and Rabbi Mattia ben Harash. So you, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, what do you say in response to this? And he said to him, as I say, the ark was buried in its place and it was not exiled, as it is stated, and the staves were so long that the ends of the staves were seen from the sacred place before the partition. So this is the first book of Kings, 8:8, describing that when in the first temple, the Ark of the Covenant was in the Holy of Holies, the wooden poles that were on either side of it were long, and they extended into the curtain, as we should see. We're going to discuss this in a moment. And they kind of poked through, not through the curtain, but they made the curtain have a dent in it, right? Like, here's a tissue, right? And like the staves were like this, So they this was like a curtain that hung like that, and the staves poked through like that. Just they made the curtain extend into the sanctuary. So it was describing that, the way that they poked through. But that verse in the first book of Kings 8:8 concludes, and they are there to this day. So that would seem to indicate that the Ark of the Covenant with its staves must be in the Temple Mount somewhere. Rabbah said to Ula, from where in this verse may it be inferred that the ark was buried in its place? And Ula replied that the source is, as it is written, and they are there to this day, which is referring to any day when one might read this sentence. In other words, forever. And Rabbah objected to this explanation. And is it the case that anywhere that it is written to this day, it means forever, as opposed to at the time when the verse was written? But isn't it also written, this is Judges 1:21, and the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwelt with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. So to here, let us say that the Jebusites were not exiled from Jerusalem, since it says in the Bible, here in the book of Judges, that they're there to this day. But wasn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says, no person passed through the land of Judea for 52 years after the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar. As it is stated, I will raise crying and wailing for the mountains and a lamentation for the pastures of the wilderness, for they have been burned, with no person passing through. And they do not hear the sound of the cattle, from the bird of the heavens to the beast, all have fled and gone. And where it says, the bird of the heaven, you don't hear the sound of cattle, from the bird of the heavens to the beast, Behema, all have fled and gone. And this word, that's Jeremiah 9:9, and this word Behema, beast, which is spelled Bet-He Mem-He, has a numerical value of 52. Right? Bet is base is 2, He and He is 5 each, that's 12, and Mem is 40, 52, alluding to the fact that no one passed through the land for 52 years. In other words, when Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the first temple, he razed Jerusalem, and the land became so desolate that no one was there for 52 years. And it was taught in another baraisa that Rabbi Yosei says, for 7 years, a curse of brimstone and salt endured in Eretz Yisrael, rendering it unfit for human habitation. And Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the rationale of Rabbi Yosef? From where does he learn this? It is derived from a verbal analogy between the words covenant in one place and covenant in another place. It is written here at Daniel 9:27, and he shall make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, i.e. 7 years. That 1 week, the 7 implies 7 years. And it is written there at Deuteronomy 29, 22, and 24, and that its entire land is brimstone and salt. This is one of the curses that Moses said to us in the book of Deuteronomy, that the Jews will not follow the law. They will be cursed, and many curses will befall them, including being exiled from their land. And not just exiled, but that the land would be burned. Right? And this entire land is brimstone and salt. They shall say, because they forsook the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers. Evidently, the Jebusites must have been exiled from Jerusalem along with the Benjamites and everyone else for at least 7 years, if not 52, since there was nobody living in Jerusalem after the destruction of the first temple. So how can you say that, and they are there to this day, means that they're there in an unbroken streak, and they must still be there, which was offered as a proof for the fact that since it's said about the staves of the Ark of the Covenant that they are there to this day, that the Ark of the Covenant must have been buried in the Temple Mount and not taken into exile in Babylonia. It would seem that the proof is faulty. Ula said to him, here with regard to the Ark, it is written, and they are there. Whereas there in that verse that deals with the Jebusites, it is not written anywhere that, so it's not just until this day, but they are, it's not, and it didn't say about the Jebusites that they are there until this day. It just says, and they dwelled until this day. Right? So how was it put in the translation about the Jebusites? Hold on, I want to make sure I get it right. And the Jebusites and the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwelt with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. And it doesn't say the children and the Jebusites dwelt with the children of Benjamin there in Jerusalem until this day. So that word there is missing. And so according to Ula, because that word is missing, it doesn't have that same kind of permanence as in a verse where the word there is included, like with respect to the Ark of the Covenant still being there in the place where it stood in the Holy of Holies. And anywhere that there is written with the phrase to this day, when there and to this day go together, then it means forever. And the Gemara raises an objection from the following verse. And some of them, even of the sons of Shimon, 500 men, went to Mount Seir, having for their captains Pelatiah and Neariah and Rephaiah, and Uziel, the sons of Ishi. And they smote the remnant of the Amalekites who escaped, and dwelt there to this day. That's 1 Chronicles 4, 42 and 43. Now the Gemara explains its objection. But Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, who conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, right after Solomon died, his son was a very weak king. There was a civil war. We had 2 kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judea. That northern kingdom was defeated much earlier by Sennacherib of Assyria, and all the Jews in the northern kingdom were taken into exile. Those are the 10 lost tribes. But Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, had already come. And through his policy of forced population transfer, he had scrambled all the nations of the lands, as it is stated in reference to Sennacherib in Isaiah 10:13. And I have removed the bounds of the peoples and have robbed their treasures. This indicates that the children of Shimon, were also exiled, despite the fact that the verse states in the book of Chronicles that they are there to this day. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, this is a conclusive refutation of Ula's statement. So the fact that in the Bible it says about the staves of the Ark of the Covenant that they are there to this day, we cannot use that verse as a proof that the Ark of the Covenant is still in the Temple Mount, buried there, rather than exiled to Babylonia. That doesn't mean that it isn't buried in the Temple Mount or that it definitively was exiled to Babylonia. It just means that we can't use that verse from the book of Kings as a proof text. Rav Nachman said that a sage taught in the Tosefta. The Tosefta is contemporaneous with the Mishna, with a little bit of extra commentary. And the rabbis say that the Ark of the Covenant was buried in the chamber of the woodshed. So we've seen this before. The rabbis finally concluded from all the different arguments and debates, etc., that the Ark of the Covenant was not taken to Babylonia, but rather that it was buried by King Josiah, or in Hebrew Yoshiahu, somewhere in the Temple Mount. The rabbis say that the Ark of the Covenant was buried in the chamber of the woodshed, and that's in the temple complex. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzhak said, we too have learned in a Mishnah. There was an incident involving a certain priest who was occupied with various matters, and he saw a floor tile in the woodshed that was different from the others. We've read this before. One of the marble floor tiles was higher than the rest, suggesting that it had been lifted out and replaced. He came and informed his friend, one of the other priests, of the uneven tile, but he was unable to finish his report and provide the exact location of the tile before his soul departed from his body. And consequently, they knew definitively that the ark was buried there, but that its location was meant to be kept secret, right? And so that movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, they sort of got it right in the sense that, well, the Ark of the Covenant is hidden away. It will be revealed when the Messiah comes, when Mashiach comes. Until then, no one is meant to find it. And if you do find it, it's going to kill you, right? And so here a priest sort of stumbled into its location by noticing something out of place in the temple courtyard. He went to tell someone where it was, and somehow he just died instantly. And the Gemara asks, what was he doing, that priest who noticed the misplaced tile? And Rabbi Chelbo said he was occupied with his axe. In other words, he was banging the floor with his axe. And he thereby discovered an empty space under a tile, which he guessed was the opening of a tunnel. And the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught 2 blemished priests were sorting wormy wood when the axe of one of them dropped and fell there and into the hole in the floor. What does this mean, blemished priest? Meaning a priest who had some kind of a skin blemish and was precluded from doing the divine service and bringing offerings up to the Mizbeach, up to the altar. They could still do something of use in the temple. They just couldn't bring offerings. What would they do? They would inspect the wood that was going to be brought onto the altar and just make sure that it wasn't wormy, that it was the finest quality, the finest possible wood for the altar fire. And they were doing that, and I guess they had axes in their hands because maybe they were chopping off, some loose ends of the wood, or maybe they were actually chopping wood. At any rate, while they were doing that job, one of them stumbled into this loose tile which he guessed was actually the covered an opening of that secret tunnel where the Ark of the Covenant is hidden in the Temple Mount. And as these logs were unfit, and then a fire burst out and consumed that priest so that the exact location remains unknown. I'm reminded of Spinal Tap, right? And like the drummer, just spontaneous combustion. And it was like the priest just suddenly had a spontaneous combustion, which is real, right? I mean, like this actually happens. There's recorded cases of a person just suddenly bursting into flame, for no apparent reason. Well, here's a recorded case in the Talmud, but the reason that's ascribed is that this priest somehow had stumbled into the location of the lost ark, and he died before he could reveal that location. Rabbi Yehuda raised a contradiction. It is written, the ends of the staves were seen. And it is written in that same verse, but they could not be seen without. How can one reconcile this contradiction? They were seen and yet not seen, i.e. the staves were partially visible. And this was also taught in a baraisa. The ends of the staves were seen. One might have thought that they did not move from their position and did not protrude at all. Therefore, the verse states, and the staves were so long. One might have thought that they ripped through the curtain and they emerged on the other side, like there were holes in the curtain. Therefore, the verse states they could not be seen without. How is this so? The staves of the ark pushed and protruded and stuck out against the curtain toward the outside and appeared like the two breasts of a woman pushing against her clothes. So, I'm just grabbing a piece of cloth that I happen to have here in the office from when the Dodgers won the World Series. But the idea was that the staves of, right, I did this before, but this will be a little bit better illustration, that the staves of the Ark of the Covenant just kind of poked through, right? They poked through the curtain, the partition separating between the Holy of Holies and the sanctuary, and kind of like that, right? It's obviously a very nice, good, heavy quality, thick curtain. Well, like this, right? And then the two staves poke through like that. Okay, you get the idea. As it is stated, this idea that the breasts of a woman extend through the cloth, and they quote a verse from the Song of Songs, as it is stated, my beloved is to me like a bundle of myrrh that lies between my breasts. For this reason, the Ark of the Covenant, where the divine presence rests, is positioned so that its staves protrude through the curtain like the breasts of a woman. Continuing the previous discussion, Rav Katina said, when the Jewish people would ascend for one of the pilgrimage festivals, the priests would roll up the curtain for them and show them the cherubs. Right, so the cherubs, we've talked about this before, the cheruvim were the angels that when we see this when God instructs Moses how to build the ark. It was made out of wood but covered in gold inside and out. There's a lovely teaching at my daughter's graduation where one of the students spoke, and that's a lesson. That's actually a beautiful moral lesson for us about the way the Ark of the Covenant was constructed, that it was not just gold on the outside, it was gold on the inside, right? It wasn't made of pure gold because then it couldn't have been carried. It would have been too heavy. It was made out of wood, but it was plated in gold on the outside and plated in gold on the inside. And the question is, why do they need to plate it in gold on the inside? Nobody sees the inside. Answer, because the inside should match the outside. We should always strive to be the kind of person, who acts well in public and acts well in private. The kind of person, who is both good on the outside and on the inside, consistent inside and out. At any rate, so there were these angels carved into the cover of the ark, two angels. And there's some debate, like which way did these angels face? Did they face each other or did they face outward? And then elsewhere we read that when the people were in favor, the angels would face the people, would face out toward the nation. When the nation of Israel was out of favor, out of God's favor, the angels would face each other. And they would actually show the angels on the ark cover to the people. They're like, wait, what? I thought only the high priest enters the Holy of Holies one day of year. It's utter privacy. What do you mean they showed the ark cover? They never brought the ark cover out of the Holy of Holies. What are you talking about? And here we're starting to read about that. So Rav Katina said when the Jewish people would ascend for one of the pilgrimage festivals, okay, so now we're not talking about Yom Kippur. We're talking about the pilgrimage festival. So that would either be Passover, Shavuos, or Sukkot. And the priests would roll up the curtain for them and show them the cherubs, which were clinging to one another, and say to them, see how you are beloved before God, like the love of a male and a female. So I did this beautiful metaphor that we often hear, that the relationship between God and Israel is like the intimate love of a husband and wife. The love of a male and a female. The two cherubs symbolize the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Jewish people. Rav Chisda raised an objection. How could the priests allow the people to see this? After all, it is stated with regard to the tabernacle, but they shall not go in to see the sacred objects as they are being covered, lest they die. Now, we're going back to a verse about the tabernacle, the Mishkan, in the wilderness, before the temple was built, when we had a traveling tabernacle. It was a tent that was erected and then packed up. When the children of Israel would go from one campsite to another in the wilderness, they would pack up the whole tabernacle. And then that's why the Ark of the Covenant had these long staves, right? So that the Levites could carry it from one place to another. Now, it says that when they were packing it up, the Levites wouldn't even look at it because it was too holy to look at. And now you're saying that they would roll up the curtain and show the Ark of the Covenant to the whole population? That seems like a contradiction. And Rav Yehuda said that Rav said when the vessels were put into their containers for transport, it was prohibited even for the Levites to look at them. And the prohibition against viewing the vessels should be even more severe when they are fixed in their sacred place within the temple. How could they be publicly displayed? And Rav Nachman said in answer, this is analogous to a bride. As long as she is engaged, betrothed, but still living in her father's house, she is modest in the presence of her husband. However, once she is married and comes to her father-in-law's house to live with her husband, she is no longer modest in the presence of her husband. Now they're married. She can be herself in the presence of her husband. Likewise, in the wilderness, when the divine presence did not dwell in a permanent place, it was prohibited to see the sacred objects for anyone but the priests. By contrast, all were allowed to see the sacred objects once they reached their permanent place in the temple. Rav Chana bar Rav Katina raised an objection from the aforementioned Mishnah. There was an incident involving a certain priest who was occupied and discovered the place where the ark was hidden, and he subsequently died before he could reveal its location. Since he was prevented from seeing the ark, it was evidently prohibited to see the sacred objects even after the temple was built. Rav Nachman said to him, this is not difficult, as you are speaking of when she was divorced. Since the Jewish people were exiled after the destruction of the first temple, and the Ark of the Covenant was not even present at all in the second temple, they are compared to a woman who is divorced from her husband. And when a woman is divorced, she returns to her original, beloved, but reserved state. She is once again modest and does not reveal herself. Likewise, the divine presence will remain hidden until the glory of the first temple is restored. Right? So we have this idea that in the first temple, there were a bunch, we've read them before, of ongoing miracles like the heavenly fire which crouched over the altar, where there was an earthly fire where the wood was burning, but above it there was a heavenly fire, miraculous manifestation, which is an element of the divine presence. Likewise, with the Ark of the Covenant inside the Holy of Holies, when the high priest would enter there on Yom Kippur, it was like the divine presence was in there. There was an extreme sort of supernatural presence in there. Now, God is everywhere. It's not like God is only in the Holy of Holies, but God let God's presence be strong and felt in the temple. That ended when the first temple was destroyed. In the second temple, we were still able to observe Yom Kippur with a high priest entering the Holy of Holies, bringing sacrifices, etc. And there were certain sort of much more low-key ongoing miracles, but not nearly at the level that it was in the first temple, so that we say that the divine presence has been hidden ever since the first temple was destroyed. The Gemara poses a question concerning Rav Katina's statement. With what are we dealing here? In what circumstance did the priests roll up the curtain to show everyone those cherubs, those sculptures of golden angels on top of the ark cover? If we say this is referring to the first temple, was there a curtain between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies? In the first temple, there was a wall there. Rather, we will say this is referring to the second temple. But were there cherubs there? Since there was no ark, it follows that there were no cherubs on it. So the Gemara answers, actually, Rav Katina is referring to the first temple. And what is the curtain that he mentioned? It is the curtain of the gates. For all the Jewish people to be able to see, they had to raise the curtains hanging on all the gates of the temple complex. And Rabbi Zera said that Rav said there were 13 curtains in the second temple, 7 opposite, i.e. on the inside of the 7 gates, 2 additional ones within the temple, one of which was at the entrance to the sanctuary, and the other one of which was at the entrance to the entrance hall. And 2 additional curtains were within the partition, in the Holy of Holies, in place of the 1 cubit partition. And 2 corresponding to them were above the upper chamber. So in the first temple that Solomon built, there was a wall between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies. But there was a big opening between the sanctuary and, an opening in that wall. And in that opening, there hung a curtain. So what they're saying is, I guess on one of the pilgrimage festivals, they would actually roll up that curtain. They would also roll up the curtain that was in front of the entrance to the sanctuary, and even the curtains outside the gates further in. And so if you stood at the right angle, even though you didn't even enter the temple complex, you could see through the gates, through the entrance hall, and through the opening and the partition all the way to the Holy of Holies. Where am I? Above the Holy of Holies, there was another level in the same layout as the one below, and a curtain was affixed there too, as no one climbed up to the higher chamber above the Holy of Holies without a pressing need. These curtains were most likely hanging in the first temple as well. And I'm almost done, so if you have questions, get them in. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, actually, Rav Katina's statement is referring to the second temple. There was a curtain at the entrance of the Holy of Holies, and indeed there were images of cherubs there, i.e. they were drawn or engraved pictures of the cherubs on the walls. So what they're saying is not that they rolled up the curtain, or maybe they did, but we're also talking about in the first temple, but Rav Katina was actually referring to the second temple. Now we know the Ark of the Covenant was not in the Holy of Holies, so what cherubs, what images of angels are we talking about? Not the sculpture of angels on the ark cover, but rather sort of like frescoes on the walls, right? So there were painted angels on the walls of the Holy of Holies. So when they lifted up the curtains, those 2 curtains that separated the sanctuary from the Holy of Holies, people could look into the Holy of Holies. They couldn't enter there, but they could see into it. And they would see the images of these angels intertwined with each other on the wall of the Holy of Holies. I guess on the back wall of the Holy of Holies is what they would see. As it is written, First Book of Kings 6:29, and he carved all the walls of the house round about with carved figures of cherubs and palm trees and open flowers within and without. And it is further stated, and he overlaid them with gold fitted upon the graven work. That's First Book of Kings 6:35, which teaches that in addition to the cherubs within the sacred place, other cherubs were drawn on the walls. And it is written according to the space of each with loyot, 1 Kings 7:36. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of according to the space of each with loyot? Rabba bar Rav Shela said, it means like a man joined and clinging to his levaya, his partner, i.e. his wife. In other words, the cherubs appear to be embracing one another. Reish Lakish said, When the Gentiles destroyed the second temple and entered the sanctuary, they saw these drawings of cherubs clinging to one another, and they peeled them from the wall and took them out to the market and said, these Jews, whose blessing is a blessing and whose curse is a curse, due to their great fear of God, should they be occupied with such matters, making images of this kind? And they immediately debased and destroyed them, as it is stated, all who honored her debase her, because they have seen her nakedness. Right? And we're talking about a time when the people fell to such a low state, spiritually speaking, that the first temple, the temple of Solomon, the temple in which there were ongoing 10 miracles on a constant basis, that temple was destroyed. Right? God allowed the home of God, the divine presence, to be destroyed. Why? Because we broke our covenant with God. Now, the Torah also says that we would be cursed and we would be punished and we would be fall low and we would be exiled and we'd have terrible, terrible things happen to us if we strayed from the covenant. But the covenant would never be broken or abridged, meaning that even though the Jewish people would suffer terrible, terrible calamities in all of Jewish history, the love between God and the Jewish people would never die. It would flicker, it would get turned to a low flame, but it would never die. And the truth of that is there for all to see. Why would such a tiny little people who were forced out of their land and have been persecuted in every generation and in every country where we've been, why are we still here? Think of all the ancient peoples that are gone. Hundreds and hundreds of ancient, mighty nations. Right, there's that great poem, Ozymandias, by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Right, I wandered to a lost and forgotten land and saw, in the desert, two vast, trunkless legs of stone, and this king, I am Ozymandias, look upon ye mighty and despair. Right, it was meaning some kingdom that was going to be forever, like Greece, like Rome, like Assyria, and you can name one after another of all these ancient mighty peoples, and they're all gone. And the Jews, why are we still here? Because it was an eternal covenant. And even though so many Jews, wandered away and broke the covenant, and as a people we didn't merit to keep the temple, not the first temple, not the second temple, there's still always been a core of Jews who remain steadfast in their love of God and God's love of the Jewish people. And here we are. We're still here, right? So we've suffered, we've been punished, we've been persecuted, but it's a no-win proposition to be the persecutor of the Jews, because all the persecutors are gone and the Jews are still here. Let's go to your comments and questions. Michael Mandel asks, couldn't it also mean that he kept the secret of the tile until his natural demise? So you're saying that perhaps one of those priests who stumbled into the tunnel leading to the hiding place of the Ark of the Covenant, which the rabbis concluded finally it was not exiled to Babylonia, it was buried somewhere in the Temple Mount, so it's there to this day. It's still there somewhere, but totally hidden, and no one can find it. And when one of these priests seemed to have stumbled on the entrance, right, two different accounts. One, his soul fled from his body. He just collapsed and died. The other one that he actually burned up. And Michael is saying, well, maybe what it means is he died a natural death without revealing. I mean, I don't know. But since there were plenty of miracles going on in that temple complex, maybe, he was miraculously prevented from revealing what he had found. John Dunn says, slightly off topic, can you explain the exilarchs of Babylon? The exilarchs simply mean the head of the Jewish community in Babylonia, right? So after the first temple was destroyed, the whole Jewish people was taken to Babylonia. Some portion of that people returned 70 years later, led by Ezra, the scribe, and the prophet Nehemiah, and reestablished the Jewish community, much smaller Jewish community in the Holy Land, and they built the second temple, and eventually that community grew. But the community in Babylonia remained there, the majority of them, and it was a long, very established, very dedicated to Torah learning community in Babylonia. And the head of the Jewish community was the exilarch, and that was a person who was actually given much respect by the monarchs. Babylonia was quickly defeated by Persia, so the Babylonian Jewish community was actually living in the kingdom of Persia. And the Persian monarchs accorded the Jewish exilarch, the head of the Jewish community, in exile. That's why a monarch in exile is an exilarch. And he was sort of like almost considered third in line for the Persian throne. And it once happened that for whatever reason, the Persian king died and his replacement died, and the exilarch became the king of Persia like for a day. And then they found a proper Persian king to replace him. But the point is, they were very wealthy, very powerful, and had a very established community. And so we had, these great sages living and teaching and working in the Babylonian community in the great yeshivas in cities like Pumbedisa and now I'm just suddenly spacing, but and Sura, and what's the other one that starts with an N? It's just escaping me for a moment. But great yeshiva Torah academies that lasted for centuries, many centuries, and the heads of those communities were called the exilarchs. Okay. Nina had to leave to go give my son a ride, so let me just check if there are any other. I'm not going to be able to answer this question, but Yosef is mentioning that concerning how you mentioned the 70 years in the book of Daniel, just wanted to point out that Rashi in his notes on Daniel chapter 9 references this page that we're discussing, Yoma 54. I'm still very confused about the math. So, I have to go through it carefully to help, but I guess it's worth pointing out that Daniel chapter 9, the Rashi is pointing to this page and this history and this discussion of whether or not the Ark of the Covenant was exiled into Babylonia. Okay. Okay, I don't see other questions. So that's what I've got for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. We're going to start with another great discussion on the foundation stone. That's actually on this page 54, but we covered too much ground tonight. So we'll start on the B side of 54 with this discussion of the foundation rock and what it means, and this question of, was the universe created from a single place and it expanded? Or was a space made for the whole universe and God built inward? Right? So this sounds a little bit like, was it a big bang? Or was it a space carved out and God built inwards? We'll have a little bit of that discussion tomorrow. With God's help. Have a great, great night and a blessed week. All the best.